Welcome to Ignite Your Confidence for women in leadership who want to speak up and stand out. I'm your host, Karen Laus. Here you'll get all of the tips and tools that you need to stand out with unshakable confidence. Let's dive into today's episode. 3 strategies to lead a productive meeting. We all have been in meetings that are so laborious, and yet we have meetings all the time. We have to have them. So how do we do them in the way that is the most productive possible? And these techniques primarily today are for when you're leading a meeting. And obviously, that's why it's called How to Lead Productive Meetings. But these tips can also be used, as one of my past mentors said, to be the voice of reason in a meeting. And I love that term, the voice of reason. This is something where, for example, let's say you notice as a participant in the meeting that things are going off track. You can be the one to step in and gently say something. So being that voice of reason is so important, especially when you're not the actual person leading or facilitating that meeting. But I've got 3 tips for you today that we're going to go through. And these were inspired recently. Well, I do teach people how to facilitate meetings, but recently they were particularly inspired at this moment in time because I was a participant in a few meetings that were a little bit frustrating. And I thought, this is how I would do it differently. And sometimes it's hard when it's a client. You're not going to necessarily tell them what to do, but if they are there to get coaching on that, then perhaps that would be an opportunity. So always look for the opportunities to be able to coach when possible in a way that, of course, is coming from a place of service. So let's talk about these things. The first one is to set expectations for the call. What is going to be happening? People are running from meeting to meeting. They're not paying as much attention to your meeting. So give them some grace, recognize that. And while it might seem obvious to you, why am I having to remind them? Why do I need to even bother? They should know this. Give them the benefit of the doubt. And most importantly, you're going to look better when you start with that. Because if you set those expectations of the call, even if it's already been communicated by email or it's in their calendar invite for the meeting, you will look even better to recalibrate and go, hey, let's just revisit why we're here and what the point of this meeting is. And in the next hour, here is my plan. This is the agenda that I have. We'll make sure to leave time to discuss things, but help me help you by making sure that we all stay on track with our comments. And of course, I want to hear everything that I can hear from you all. And at the same time, we'll stay focused. And as I say this, I realize I'm digressing into one of my other tips, but the main tip, number 1, set expectations for the call. And I will tell you, this happened in a co-facilitation situation that I was in just last week. And as I'm recording this, it is September 8th. So I'm not sure when you're listening to this message, but it was about a week, September 8th, 2022. And we had been used to an executive on their team introducing us and setting the expectations. Well, for this call, we frankly forgot. We made the assumption that they knew why they were there and that they were told that in advance. So wouldn't you know, that is actually the feedback that we got later that day from the company that said, hey, we would have really liked to know what the point of the call was, what the expectations were. And I thought, oh my gosh, I can't believe this is something that I totally forgot. And this is what I teach. So lesson learned, good reminder. These are great things to always recalibrate on and remember, especially when we're in the heat of the moment or we just are so focused. And this happens to the best of us. We get focused on our own content and we forget that not everybody is in our heads. And this is a reminder. Some of you have heard me talk about the curse of knowledge, but the more that we know about a topic, the more ingrained we are in that subject, and the more expert we become, the harder it is to see things through the lens of our listener. And this is why it's so important to pay attention to the audience's needs. What do they need to know? What do they care about? And how can you serve them during the time that you have to be most effective? And let's face it, you want to look good, that you came across as productive and in charge as well in a way that served the room. Okay, so that's number 1, set expectations. Number 2 is to show that you're in control. And what I mean by this is to lead well. A lot of it has to do with how we actually use our voice, the mechanics of our voice. Does it sound like the person is in charge and knows what they're talking about? Sometimes I coach a lot of women, mostly women, and I have a lot of women that will say something like, well, people interrupt me a lot, or I can't seem to get a word in, or even if I set expectations, I feel like people don't necessarily listen to what I have to say, or I'm just not heard. Well, that may be the product of your environment, but it also might be you. If we sound hesitant and we're using a bunch of filler words, or we're tentative in our speech, or even halting, it's not going to sound like we know what we're talking about. And then people aren't going to trust that we are taking them somewhere and that we're in control. So, so what I want to talk to you about today, is the fact that that would be so painful to listen to. And I recognize that we are all a work in progress, but do everything that you can to speak with conviction, lead things well, and make sure that you show that you are in control and that you are a leader that is taking them somewhere, even if it's just taking them somewhere in that actual meeting. That's why it is so important. You don't want to hesitate. You don't want to come across as halting in your speech. And you definitely want to make sure that you are speaking with volume that's strong. You also want to come across with vocal variety, because imagine if I were talking like this the entire time. After a while, you would go, oh my gosh, I can't take this anymore. Abort, abort. So make sure that you are using your voice in a way that represents you best. Because that's another thing that I see. I see a lot of women misrepresenting themselves by how they come across. People with years of experience, really smart women, and yet the way that they talk, they are not coming across as strong and powerful as they actually are. So you want to make sure that your communication matches your expertise and prowess as well. All right. So number 2 is show that you're in control. So far, we've covered number 1, set expectations for the call or the meeting. Number 2, show that you're in control. Number 3 is to be inclusive. And let me say what I mean by that. This happened twice recently. Oh my goodness. It was so uncomfortable. I was on the receiving end. I hopped in on a call, and it's a team that I'm working with through another partner that I'm collaborating with. And I get on the call and everybody's talking. The person in charge never acknowledged me. And I was on there for about 15, 20 minutes as I was listening, thinking, this is really weird. I'm the one that's going to be taking over and the lead on this account, and no one is saying anything to me, not even the HR people in the room. So that was a little bit weird. And I'm a little bit bummed, even from my HR background, that nobody on this call, and there were 5 people on the call, acknowledged that I was there. So this is a great example, though. What do you do when that happens? Or what do you do if somebody forgets to introduce you? I've got a story for that in a minute, too. But in this case, I interjected and I said, hey, everybody. And I used the empathy bridge. And this is a really good, a good point. It's to empathize or acknowledge what somebody said and then direct the conversation to where you want to take it. So I waited for a strategic time for me to jump in. And then I said, all right. Oh, no, I didn't say all right. I lost my train of thought there for a moment. I jumped in and I said, hey, everybody, wanted to acknowledge that I'm here and I'm listening and I feel your pain. As a former HR person, I definitely understand what you're going through and the challenges that you're facing here. I wanted to acknowledge and say hello. I'm Karen. And that's about all I said, was just thank you, and wanted to let you know that I'm here and I'm listening. So sometimes you are not going to be acknowledged. So then you've got to take the reins and interject yourself. A great way to do it, once again, is through that acknowledgement or empathy bridge, where you acknowledge something that someone said, use that as a launch pad for you to take things over, not totally, but take control in that moment and introduce yourself, or at least acknowledge that you're there. You obviously need to keep in mind of what is the greater good. Like in my case, that was not a time to introduce myself. They were sharing real frustrations with the team. And so I wanted to at least simply say, I hear you. I get it. I'm Karen. I'm here. That's about it. So I got an opportunity later to introduce myself, but it is fascinating how sometimes people don't do that when they're leading calls. So you be the one to do that so that people will feel more connected to you. You're going to have better relationships. You're naturally going to, if you acknowledge someone, first of all, it is the greatest human need on the planet for people to feel important, ultimately to feel seen. And if you show that you see someone, they're going to remember that. They're going to know, oh, I even trust her more. Now, they might not consciously say that, but the experience that you're creating for them is one of inclusivity, acknowledgement, care, and trust. And really, at the end of the day, it's care. It's all about, do you care about someone? Do you show that you care about the person as well as the experience that they're having? So those are my 3 tips for you today. Let's repeat these. Number 1, set expectations. Number 2, Number 2, show that you're in control. And number 3 is to be inclusive. And when you do that, you are going to have even more productive meetings and better relationships. So one of the things that I wanted to share is a time related to this part about not being included was another time where I was, once again, another collaboration. And the person that I was working with had been with this client for a long time. So he gets on the call, he starts talking and starting into the expectations. And I said, hey, let me just do a quick interruption here. Let's call her Joan as the client. Joan, so nice to meet you. I wanted to simply jump in here and say I'm really looking forward to working with you and your team over the next year. And I am excited to be here, something like that. But it was simply the acknowledgement. I had to, again, sometimes you have to advocate for yourself. And that's my bonus tip for you today. Advocate for yourself in any situation. So that requires speaking up. Also, and often when it's uncomfortable, both of those situations were a little bit awkward for me to interject and pop in there. But over the years, I have gotten a lot more confident. Obviously, I'm teaching people how to do that, particularly women, but definitely want to make sure that you advocate for yourself, even when it's uncomfortable, because that's going to make you stand out and you're going to be heard. Ultimately, we all want to be seen, especially as an influential leader and as a woman leading, whether you're on an entrepreneurial journey or you're in a corporate environment. We've got to make sure that we're heard and seen as the influential leaders that we are. So be unstoppable, carry on, and baby steps. It's simply one step at a time. Start speaking up and take the lead whenever possible in the way that you come across with your voice as well. So those are some bonus add-ons there. I hope that you have even more productive meetings, and I might even do a part 2 because I have even more ideas, but I didn't want to be overwhelming in one episode. So stay tuned for that. Have a wonderful day, everybody. And that's a wrap of another episode of Ignite Your Confidence. I'm your host, Karen Laus. Thank you so much for listening. If you loved today's episode, please subscribe and leave a review. It helps other people find the podcast faster, and it certainly helps me. If you're interested in more tips and tools around confidence, please join me over in my Facebook group called Ignite Your Confidence with Karen Laus. Remember, you too can stand out with unshakable confidence.